There's a moment that happens in every rental application that nobody talks about, and it happens before you've even toured the apartment. You fill in the box that asks for your annual income. You hit submit, and in that instant, before a human being has even looked at your file, a piece of software has already decided what kind of tenant you are, not whether you'll pay rent on time, not whether you'll take care of the place, something else entirely. It's decided how much leverage you have. And the number that triggers the shift isn't some round, dramatic figure like 6 figures or 50,000. It's much smaller than that, much closer than you think, and almost nobody is watching for it. That number is around $35,000 in liquid savings. Cross it and the entire rental relationship changes shape. Stay below it, and you are, structurally, a different kind of customer. Today, I'm going to walk you through exactly how that works, why property managers are trained to spot it within seconds, and what changes the moment you're no longer on the wrong side of that line. Let me introduce a picture I want you to hold on to for the rest of this video. Picture a bridge with a toll booth on it, except this bridge is the only way across the river, and the toll isn't fixed. It changes depending on how badly the operator thinks you need to cross tonight. If you're standing there with nowhere else to go, the price goes up. If you're standing there with a second bridge quietly waiting in your back pocket, the price comes down, whether or not you ever mention it. Rental housing works exactly like that bridge. Keep that image in mind, because we're coming back to it more than once. Here's the part almost nobody explains about how leasing actually works behind the desk. Most large property management companies use a scoring system that goes far beyond your credit score. It weighs your income-to-rent ratio, sure, but it also weighs something called payment elasticity, which is a polite way of saying how much financial slack you have if something goes wrong. A renter who clears the minimum income requirement, but has almost nothing in savings, gets flagged internally as high risk of late payment, even with a perfect credit history. That flag doesn't reject you outright, it does something quieter. It changes what you're offered. Consider two people applying for the exact same unit. Both earn $60,000 a year. Both have a 740 credit score. On paper, identical applicants. The first has around $4,000 total to their name. The second has $40,000. The listing agent will tell you, if you catch them off guard, that these two applications get handled completely differently, even though the spreadsheet says they qualify the same. The first applicant gets offered the unit with a higher deposit requirement, sometimes double the standard amount, framed as a security measure. The first applicant is far less likely to get concessions negotiated, like a free month or a capped rent increase at renewal. The first applicant, if rent goes up 8% at the 12-month mark, has no real option but to accept it, because moving costs money they don't have. The second applicant has all of that leverage in reverse, and most of the time, they don't even have to use it. The property manager can simply tell, the way a card player can tell, who's bluffing and who isn't. This is where the story of a woman I'll call Priya is useful. Priya rented a one-bedroom in a mid-sized city for 4 years. Every single year her rent went up. Year 1, 3%. Year 2, 5%. Year 3, almost 9%, right when the local market was tightening. Priya complained to friends every time, but she never once tried to negotiate the renewal. Because the truth was she was carrying about $2,000 in savings against a security deposit that would eat most of it if she had to move. Her landlord never said this out loud, but her leasing office absolutely knew it. Applicants in her building who moved out mid-lease almost always did so because of a financial shock, not because they found something better. Priya was, in the internal language nobody says to your face, a sticky tenant. Sticky is good for the landlord. It is not good for Priya. Then Priya's circumstances shifted. A side project she'd been running quietly for 2 years finally started generating steady income. And within about 14 months, she had $36,000 sitting in a savings account she barely touched. She didn't move, she didn't even plan to move. But at her next renewal, when the letter came proposing another 8% increase, she did something she'd never done in 4 years. She called the leasing office and said she'd need to think it over, and that she was also looking at two comparable units nearby that had come in slightly under her current rent. She wasn't bluffing this time, and it turns out that's the entire difference. Within 3 days, the leasing office called back with a renewal at last year's rate, no increase at all, plus a small concession on a parking fee she hadn't even asked about. Nothing about Priya's job changed. Nothing about her credit changed. The only thing that changed was that her walkaway options stopped being theoretical. That's the mechanism behind almost every negotiation you'll ever have with anyone who profits from you staying put, whether that's a landlord, a lender, or an employer. Below a certain buffer, your ability to leave is a bluff, and the other side can typically tell. Above it, the option becomes real, and real options get priced differently, even when nobody says so out loud. Now here's where the story gets a little more uncomfortable, because it's not just about individual negotiations. It's about how entire buildings and portfolios are run. Large property management firms track something internally called renewal probability. Essentially, a prediction of how likely a given tenant is to simply accept whatever renewal terms they're offered without pushing back. Tenants who have shown no history of negotiating, no history of threatening to leave, and importantly, no visible financial cushion, score extremely high on this metric. And the properties don't hide what they do with that information. Renewal increases are frequently set higher for units where renewal probability is high, and lower for units where the tenant has demonstrated they might actually walk. This isn't a conspiracy meeting in a back room. It's a pricing model, built the same way airlines price seats differently based on how likely you are to pay whatever the screen shows you. The system doesn't need malice. It only needs an incentive and enough data to act on it, and rental housing has both in abundance. There's a second layer to this that's even less visible, and it involves the deposit itself. A standard security deposit is typically capped by local regulation at 1 or 2 months' rent. But many landlords have quietly built in what's sometimes called a risk-adjusted deposit, an additional amount charged specifically to tenants whose income-to-savings ratio looks thin, even when their income alone would qualify them easily. It's often labeled as a pet deposit, an amenity fee, or a move-in administrative charge, so it never shows up on paper as what it actually is. Which is a price attached to how replaceable the landlord believes you are if things go sideways. A tenant with visible savings almost never gets asked to pay these additional fees, because the underwriting model has already priced them as low risk on every axis that matters. So what does $35,000 actually buy you, mechanically, in this relationship? It buys you roughly the equivalent of first and last month's rent, a full security deposit, and moving costs for a comparable unit in most mid-size American cities, with a small buffer left over. That's the number where switching apartments stops being a financial emergency and starts being a genuine option you could execute in under 60 days if you needed to. Below that number, you are, in every functional sense, captive. Above it, you're a free agent who happens to currently live somewhere. This changes the negotiation script entirely. Below the threshold, the only leverage you have is complaining, which property managers are trained to absorb and ignore, because complaining costs the tenant nothing and therefore signals nothing. Above the threshold, your leverage is silence plus a credible alternative, which is precisely what moved Priya's renewal. You don't need to threaten anything. You barely need to say much at all. The math does the talking, the same way it does at the toll booth, where the driver with a second bridge simply doesn't stop to argue about the price. They just take the other road, and the operator, watching in the mirror, adjusts the toll for the next car before it even arrives. There's a wider pattern hiding underneath all of this, and it's worth naming directly. Every relationship where one party profits from your inability to leave runs on the same quiet math. Your bank benefits from you staying below the threshold, where switching institutions becomes worth the hassle. Your employer benefits from you staying below the threshold, where quitting becomes financially survivable. Your landlord benefits from you staying below the threshold, where moving is a realistic option rather than a hardship. None of these institutions are unusually evil for doing this. They're simply responding to the same incentive, which is that a captive customer is a more profitable customer, and captivity is measured in dollars, not character. The uncomfortable part is that most people spend years trying to fix this problem with the wrong tool. They negotiate harder, they complain louder. They read scripts online about what to say to a leasing agent. None of that moves the needle nearly as much as simply building the buffer that makes the threat real. Priya didn't get a better outcome because she learned better words. She got a better outcome because the words finally had something true standing behind them. So if you're renting right now, here is what actually shifts your position in order. First, calculate what it would genuinely cost you to move to a comparable unit today. First month, last month, deposit, and moving expenses all in. That number is your personal threshold, and for most renters in most cities, it lands somewhere between $25,000 and $40,000, depending on the local market. Second, build that specific number as a separate, untouched account, not folded into a general emergency fund, because the psychological weight of a labeled account changes how you use it. Third, at your next renewal, do exactly what Priya did. Don't threaten, don't perform outrage. Simply mention, calmly and factually, that you're evaluating comparable options nearby, and let the silence do the rest. If the number behind that sentence is real, the leasing office will feel it. The same way every toll booth operator feels the difference between a driver who's stuck and a driver who has somewhere else to be. The apartment doesn't change. The lease terms don't change on the page. But the moment you cross that threshold, you stop being priced like someone with nowhere else to go, and you start being priced like someone who happened to choose to stay. That distinction is worth more, over the years you spend renting, than almost any other financial decision you'll make that doesn't involve your actual income.